Good morning. Hopefully, you're not as jet lagged as I am still, but my name is Vanessa Johnson, and we're going to explore the idea of what if GraphQL knew accessibility, where we use directives to embed accessibility information. So, before we dive in, a little bit about me is that I'm an Android engineer at the New York Times. I've been there a little bit over a year now, and I work on the games app. So, if you've ever heard of Wordle, Connections, maybe even Pips, which is like our newer game, that's the app that I work on. And then I'm passionate about accessibility. So before we get into any GraphQL schema or API calls, we have to hone in on why exactly accessibility is important. So accessibility affects millions of users. Accessibility clients depend on consistent semantics, for example, screen readers. So where we have accessibility tools that convey or relay information given to them to the users to describe what is on the screen, which is especially important for anyone that has visual impairments. And we want to we want to increase inclusivity throughout the app to cater to more people. While this is important for a business perspective because you can target a larger user base, but it's also morally important to make sure that your users feel catered to in a way and that you appreciate their business. So that will most likely have them continue using your app in the long run. Okay, so now let's zoom in and see what developers are actually working with today. And for example, we can think of a user using an app where you will have a list of movies and they want to figure out what's a good movie to listen to or watch. So right now we have a generic query where we query for a title, a release year, and a rating. So there's no accessibility metadata within this query, so developers will have to guess semantics and labels on the native side. On the surface, this looks fine, but here are where the cracks start to show, where there's no single source truth of accessibility messaging. There's brittle, duplicated client-side accessibility logic. So depending on if you have your app available on multiple platforms, like Android or iOS, or maybe even web, they will have to construct these messaging information and apply them to different components within their app. Accessibility enhancements are added late instead of built in. So there are many times where companies tend to wait until the last milestone or the last push to get a feature out to kind of construct more accessibility details to enhance their app, where it should be considered and done throughout the whole entire process. So with this idea, we're kind of shifting accessibility left in the development process, where you have more of a focus of making your app more inclusive. And there's also no easy way to provide, per instance, field level nuance depending on if you need it, depending on your use case. And those cracks, they turn into bigger headaches on the client side, where we have to do client-side string stitching. So for example, we have a row. So you can think of the list as each row will be a specific movie, and you'll have a string construction to say like the movie released in a certain year and has a rating out of 10, if that's like your suffix. But this can also lead to inconsistent phrasing depending on the developer. So one developer on the Android side versus the iOS side can construct the string differently, and that will add to a more inconsistent user experience depending on the platform that they're using. So we would want to make sure that there's consistency amongst all platforms. All right, let's take a step back and we can look at the schema that we're starting from. So similar to the query that we saw before, this is the type movie. We have a title, a release year, and a rating. All right, now here's the shift in thinking. Like, what if our schema itself carried accessibility metadata? So here you can inject, there will be an additional parameter that you can query for, which is this A11Y, short for accessibility, and you'd be able to grab that information and apply it to whatever component you need it to be applied to. To make that happen, we have to wire up our schema in a smarter way. So we can start off with our schema and our directives. And then we have to have some way to wire a custom wiring plugin where we can inject this information and have it accessible for us to query for. As a result, you get an enhanced schema where you can get that information. And then an example as a response would be a summary of the whole entire row kind of merged together. So instead of being each component of the row being spoken out individually, you can have it as a summary and a condensed description. The secret sauce is custom directives. So there are 3 directives that you could use. The first one is where you can define a sentence pattern depending on what your needs are. So all information that would be displayed on the row can be spoken out together. The middle one is accessibility token. So a field level structured data where you can apply additional information or additional context per attribute or value that you can query for. So this allows for further flexibility when trying to transform your data before you send it to your client. The last one could be a type level fallback pointer. So depending on if you're not using a lot of accessibility information, you could have a default message that is applied to each row, and that can be spoken out to the user. Okay, here is what that could look like in practice. So taking the type movie that we saw before, we can apply the accessibility label as a default. For here, it's just a title, but you would probably want to be more specific to the specific title in that row. And then the template is the same structure of the sentence that we saw before. And for the accessibility token, if you look at the rating, you can apply additional information, kind of like a suffix or a prefix, depending on what your needs are. So here, we will add the out of 10 suffix to transform the information before sending it back to the client. Okay, so let's run a query and see it in action. So we have a list of movies, and you can query for the generic data like an ID, a title, a release year, and a rating. And then notice that there's an additional attribute for the accessibility, and you can apply query for the label and the summary within the templates. There's some more options that you could apply query for, but for right now, we're just gonna hone in on the summary. Okay, so here's a response. Notice that there's accessibility information now in there, and it only includes what you queried for. So there were some enhancements that I did in a plugin that I'll show later on, but it just makes sure that the only information that's in the summary is what you queried for, so you don't have to wait for any additional parameters that you don't need. Okay, that was the back end, but how does this feel on Android? So of course I'm gonna have some mobile examples in here since I'm an Android engineer, but you can think of, you make an API call, and each movie is stored in an object called a movie, and you can access the summary through the accessibility attribute, and you can apply that to a content description of your row. So content description is similar to an alt key on web or an accessibility label in Swift, and it gives us overall summary of what is in your row, and that will be spoken out to your user. Just to prove that it's not only Android, obviously I have a Swift example as well, where you can access the summary in the same way and apply it to your HStack. So HStack is similar to a row. They're kind of constructed in the same way, where it's a horizontal layout. Okay, so what does this actually buy us? So these are the pain points that we looked at earlier on, but now we can see that there is a single source truth of accessibility messaging. So just making sure that we have the exact same queries on each platform, we're getting back the same accessibility messaging to apply to said component. It removes brittle, duplicated client-side accessibility logic. So now we have one area where we construct that accessibility message, and then we can grab it from the server. There's dynamic per instance summaries with minimal effort, and then there's optional field level nuance when needed. Of course, there is no perfect solution as of right now, but there's some questions you still have to answer. So who exactly owns the accessibility directives? Who is in charge of making these? Is it the backend engineers, designers, product? Most likely a combination of both, where we can come together and decide how exactly should this user experience be? What should be spoken out to the user at this point, at this time, on this screen? And then what should happen when metadata is missing? How do we enforce completeness? And then localization. So if your app is available in multiple languages, should that stay natively? Is there a way that it can be incorporated on the API side? Most likely stay natively for right now, but that's an idea that you can consider. So for right now, I put together a repo that you can try out for a demo. It would be too long if I demoed it here, so you can find it there. There's instructions on how to run the example, and you can see accessibility metadata in action. Okay, so you can try it out, see where it can be improved, try it out with some dummy data, and replace the one that I have there, and then see what can be improved, what's broken, things like that. And then that's just a start. If you want to find me outside of this, that's my LinkedIn and my portfolio. I try to keep them up to date. But yeah, thanks for coming to my talk. Yeah, and if you still need that.
Are you actively using this in Wiki?
No.
Not yet. No.
No.
Is there some alternative that they?
No, we construct it natively now. So there's like a higher level of communication between developers on each side. So this could be something we use in the future. I don't know, but it's just an idea for right now.
Gotta get like opportunity to influence them. So push that.
Maybe. I did talk to my manager, so maybe we'll see. That's it.